Now, assuming you have this, you have your topic, your question. If it's a larger project, you have a proposal, or you have at least figured out, pinned down what you want to do, what you want to accomplish. Now you need material. You need literature. You may need data that you need to generate, or maybe the data, the information that you need is already available in writing. You still need to find it. You probably need arguments if you're going to deal with anything controversial. You will need to consider alternative and competing views and claims on your subject. Most of the time there is debate, and then you need to be aware of what that looks like. Who are the parties? What are the varying points of view, and what are the arguments? We will need some understanding of this in order to write a good paper or thesis, and show that you actually know what you're talking about, and that you've entered into this conversation, into this debate. You've joined that circle of people who have something to say on a particular subject, and you're now joining in that conversation, and venture to make in writing your own, presumably modest, first contribution. And that's what this is about. But it means you need material, you need sources. Now, at this point, it's very important to realize that sources differ in quality, and you need to develop a sense for that kind of quality, for the weight or lack of weight that certain sources have. If you write a paper and all that appears in the bibliography is entries from the internet and from Wikipedia, that the first impression is this looks weak, this looks thin. You have not engaged with any of the more serious, more in-depth scholarly literature. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Wikipedia, and I think it's pretty good, but for a scholarly purpose, it may be a good place to get started, to get a first idea about your topic, but it's usually not enough, not sufficient. It doesn't have enough substance if you want to join the academic discourse about a particular subject. It's a first introduction. The same with other books, or the same with books. Say, for instance, it's in biblical studies, passage of scripture, you consult and compare different commentaries. You need to realize that, for instance, the InterVarsity, the Tyndale commentary on the New or the Old Testament, well, it's a fine commentary, but it's relatively thin. It's written for a very broad audience. I mean, it's again, it's probably great as a first source to consult if you have access to it. But if that's all that there is in a paper on exegesis of a Bible passage, again, it looks a bit thin, because that's not a very scholarly or weighty commentary. It's one for a broad general audience. Word biblical commentary, or the international commentary on the Old or the New Testament, or the Greek Testament commentary, those are, and you can see at first sight, they're much thicker. Those are weightier sources to use. Now that's one thing to be aware of as you start collecting material for your paper or thesis. Sources differ in quality, and you need to be aware of this. If you find a book on the topic that doesn't have any footnote or reference in it, the author just presents his view on things, then that's a bit hard to evaluate. On what does he base his claims? So that too is it may have to play a role in your paper, but that's not a great resource to find accurate information on the state of your field. As you are collecting sources and then information from these sources, I would strongly suggest that you make sure you record all the relevant bibliographical information. If you write down anything from a particular book or other source, any quote or summary information from that source, also record the full bibliographical information that you will need at the very end for your bibliography. Now, you may end up not using that particular source, but better to have the information and not use it than to not have the information at the very end when you're finalizing your thesis or your paper, the deadline's looming, and you realize you don't know who the publisher of this book is, or you can't find that website anymore, or you have to quote the source, but you didn't write down which page it was on. This is terrible. You don't want that to happen. So no, not at the end. So try and record all this information as you go, so that you have it when you need it. The internet has made it a little bit easier to find such information afterwards, but still, it's a lot easier if you have written it down right away. Where to find the material? If possible, find a good library and learn to use the catalogs they have to find literature. I'm privileged to live in Germany. Everyone who's a resident in Germany has the right of access to the public and academic libraries in the country. And within your state of residence, you even have the right to get a free library card that gives you a permission to borrow books from the library. So that's an ideal situation. All their catalogs are online, so I can search, research titles, sources for any particular subject. That's an ideal situation. Most other countries are not so generous with their libraries, so this may be a real difficulty for you, and you have to find the best solution that's possible in your situation and in your location. But it will certainly help if you can find a good library, and it will certainly help to access some sort of academic catalog on the internet, a library catalog that enables you to search for literature on certain topics and keywords, so that you can draw up a list of sources that maybe or that look promising, that look like they may help you with what you're trying to do. It's also possible to use Google Scholar. My experience is that it often tends to generate so many hits, so many items, that it's not always helpful. A good place for a first start actually is Amazon, because you you'll quickly be able to see if there are any books on your topic, and often gives you a bit more information as well, whether people liked it, reviews, maybe there's a preview that you can look at. Gives that enables you to quickly assess more accurately whether this book might be helpful for your topic or not, because you have more information. Same applies, by the way, to Google Books, which where you can search for books on a particular topic, and it often also gives you the option of a preview, so you can actually have a look into the book, see if it's worth your time or not. That's an important decision to make once you are collecting literature. It always depends, of course, but you may quickly have more than you can handle. And so the question becomes, what truly is relevant and important for your writing, and so you need to assess this. Amazon, Google Books may help. If you have access to the book and you can look at it, have a look at the table of content, what's printed on the back. Even just knowing the publisher may give you a hint. Or if it's Baker Academic, that tells you something. It's a Christian publisher, and obviously it's not for a broad audience. It's an academic publication. So often the publisher will tell you something, and with time, you should develop a sense of who's important in your field of study, and what are important publisher and reference works or standard texts in your field of research. Obviously, in biblical studies, there's different series of commentaries, and they have their own strengths, their own characteristics, and with time you'll probably pick up and know which commentary series you prefer to use for a particular purpose. Again, Tyndale may be very good for a quick reference. If it needs to go in depth, you may need one of the more academic and more exhaustive commentaries. And with time, one develops an awareness of who are important people in the field and what are important reference works. For instance, when it comes to Greek and Hebrew lexica or other reference works. One more point on collecting material. Once you have a start, those first publications that you find and that you look at will probably should have a bibliography that quickly enables you to find other people and other publications on the subject that you're looking at, and so you can work backward and quickly find more publications that are relevant. The downside, of course, is you can only go backward. Publications only make reference to earlier publications, and so for the most recent scholarship on your subject, that's not an option. You have to be aware that you probably have to rely on the internet for this, and for academic catalogs of libraries. You have to be aware that this way you go further and further back in time. You need to make sure that you especially cover the last few years of publication, because that probably gives you the most up-to-date state of research, of scholarship on a particular subject. So by all means, use those bibliographies in sources you find, but be aware that there's an increasing gap between the sources you find and the present that you also need to cover.